I'm about to talk about the workflow app. It's a development update. So if you're interested in that, stick around. And if you're not interested in it, stick around and see if I can persuade you to be interested in it. But my name is Jeremy Huff, and I am a core system librarian at Texas A&M University. A few years back, we started working on a workflow app to integrate into Folio. And I've been talking about this at WOLFcons for years now as a tradition. I don't know what I'm going to do when the app's done and I don't get to come talk about it anymore. But we've been working hard, and I just want to kind of show you guys where we're at and what we've been working on. All right. So just a little overview of what we're going to cover in this presentation. I'm going to just kind of talk a little bit in generalities about the workflow app. I'll give you a specific update on our development progress so far in 2024. I'm going to endeavor to do a live demo, and so we'll see how that goes. I have regretted that decision in the past, but we'll see. And then I'll talk a little bit about future plans for workflows and just some of the development that we hope to see coming up in the next year. Okay, about workflows. All right. Like I said, a few years back, this is around 2018, Timmy was approached by, I guess it was OLF officially, but there was a desire to see a proof of concept for integration of workflows into Folio. So a company out of Austin, BP3, was approached. They were experts in the Community Workflow Engine, which is an open source engine. And I'm seeing some chats going on. Okay, cool. I think largely based on College Station, which is where Texas A&M is located, its proximity to Austin. We have a large development staff relative to a lot of libraries, and we were involved in the Folio project. So I think we were a natural fit to collaborate with these folks on this development. So myself and another developer went and met with these consultants, and this is how workflows, the proof of concept of the workflow app, was brought into existence. After that was done, when we went live with Folio in 2021, we had this implementation of integration of workflows into Folio, and we liked it, so we started using it. And so right now in our production instance of Folio, we have this up and running. It's all back-end components. A lot of the development that's taken place this year is to try to bring the functionality into the user interface. Let's see, I'm doing a timeline here. 2023, last year, we decided that we wanted to start directing our own development efforts on Folio. Previously, we had been contributing developers to community-directed teams and trying to contribute some development cycles on other teams' sprints. But we decided to form our own development team, the Aggies development team, and we have been sprinting with a cadence of 2 sprints dedicated to community work, at 1 sprint dedicated to local tickets and things that pop up at our library. And our sprints are 3 weeks long, so that's 6 weeks of community work, 3 weeks of local work is kind of the rhythm there. And we've since January 1st, we've completed 8 of these sprints. I'm happy to show y'all the progress on that. Let's see. I would love this slide to advance. There we go. Okay. This is just a little bit about the architecture of our workflow app. It's made up of these components right here. We have mod workflow. What mod workflow does is it provides the workflow interface to a copy, and it manages and persists a workflow object. So basically, it defines for Folio what a workflow is and what its capabilities are, and that's pretty much it. It's just kind of CRUD, create, read, update, delete operations on the workflow. There's another module that we have implemented called Mod Camunda, and this provides the workflow engine interface. The reason we did 2 separate modules here is we are really keen on the idea that other people who don't want to use the Camunda workflow engine could implement their own workflow engine module that is able to interact with whatever workflow engine they want to use. So, for instance, Airflow or maybe Microsoft Power Automate. Mod Camunda takes the workflow object from the mod workflow. It turns it into BPMN, which is an XML description of a business process workflow that Camunda wants to use. It hands that off to Camunda. Camunda is the engine that actually executes that. For a long time, we've been kind of interacting with this process using a command line interface and a local registry of workflows. We call that FW registry and FW CLI. That was a stopgap solution that just kind of enabled us to use this software. Ultimately, from the perspective of how we're trying to, kind of productize this thing for, for Folio, we want these interactions that we have been using the command line interface for. We want these to happen in the UI. So that's why we're building a UI component to interact with the backend modules. All right. So I guess I know oftentimes you save questions for the end, but I know that was a lot of information. So I would not mind pausing real fast and just doing a check to see if anybody has any questions about what I've talked about so far. Yes, sir. Oh, the mute button's up down too.
There we go. So you just mentioned that it interfaces with Okapi. Now, I was just in another meeting about this other new thing, which is replacing Okapi,
Yeah.
Eureka. So is this, if someone is implementing Eureka instead of Okapi, will this thing not work?
That's a really good question. And at the risk of answering for the teams that are dealing with this Eureka stuff, I've been in a lot of sessions regarding that and have taken, as a module developer, I've taken great comfort in the assurance that modules will not need to change in order to participate with the Eureka approach. So if that is in fact the case, then we shouldn't have a problem. That's my understanding and my desperate hope. Any other questions? Okay. All right. These are the sprints that we've engaged in 2024. There's 8 of them, and each one kind of had a theme. So right off the bat, we jumped into actually just breaking ground on the UI workflow module. So just getting it into the user interface of Stripes. As things go, as soon as we kind of started dusting off this code and actually implementing it in Folio, we realized that we had massive amounts of tech debt that we had to address. And so the very following sprint was an attempt to pay down some of that tech debt and make sure that we were addressing bugs and shortcomings that kind of came up during that first sprint. We then, after getting a UI present in Folio, started with a read operation. So we wanted to expose the workflows that we had in the back end and the front end. So we did browse and discovery. Previously, deleting a workflow had been a very manual kind of interaction with the database kind of process. There was a lot of boxes to check in order to safely delete a workflow. So we streamlined that process and made sure that workflows could be deleted through the user interface. One of the things that has come up for workflows a whole lot in the discussion over the years is this idea that institutions would want to potentially share their workflows between different institutions. So in order to empower that sharing, these workflow objects need to be portable and be able to move from like one system to another. So we definitely wanted early on in this development process to make sure that these workflows that we were building were in fact portable in that way. So the next sprint that we went on to, sprint 5, worked on this concept of being able to import and export, specifically import, but we lay the groundwork for exportation also. But these workflows, so they can kind of be packaged up into, we call them FWZs, but just these little compressed, portable expressions of a workflow. That took a couple sprints, and then we got to some stuff that is a little bit more exciting, actually visualizing the workflows in the user interface. So we created a detail view where you could get some of the data about the workflow displayed on the screen, and a graph-like view of the workflow in sequence. And then the sprint that we just wrapped up just recently introduced, kind of wrapped up some of the visualization work. There's certainly still more to do on that, but kind of push that forward a little bit more. And then also introduced a new task node in workflow, which is something that we've talked about for a long time. We knew we needed, and it is what we're calling the input task. So this is so far, workflows have definitely been a very automated thing, just kind of automated processes that can fire off and accomplish a certain sequence of automated tasks. But true business processes, though they can take advantage of automation, at the end of the day, we're a bunch of humans trying to get work done. And so human input is an important part of these business processes. So this task pauses the workflow and allows it to wait for humans to interject information into the workflow. All right. Yeah, so you can see just kind of the general focus of our work so far. In the last few years, all the work has been on the back end, and the lion's share of the work in this year has been on the user interface. So we've definitely, been getting a lot of work done on the UI. We are developing the UI, of course, in Stripes. We are doing it in TypeScript, which is a little different than some of the other modules. But a lot of good development there. All right, we're at the exciting part. Okay, let's see if I can make this work. All right, I'm going to pull up our wiki. What's exciting about this is, at least in theory, anybody here could go try this out, I suppose, if you wanted to. So this stuff is all available. We've opened up the, well, you'll see. Okay, so let me see if this will get me where I want to go. Yeah. So the Aggies development team, which is doing this work, has a wiki presence on the Folio project. And if I want to pull up our Scratch environment, I could do so at this link right here. And presumably that will bring a Folio up. Let's just maximize this. Okay. Get the standard login information. So I'm going to try to move this thing. Okay. All right. So down here at the bottom, you can see we have a workflow app there. And not a lot going on, right? You got the browse capability that I mentioned. We have stubbed out an area for creation. But out of the box, this is what it looks like. I'm going to try to import an example workflow into this so that y'all can see what these workflows will look like in the system. So we do have this link on the wiki, example workflows. If you go here, you can see some of these FWZ files, right? So I'm going to go to I'll do the script task right here. I'm going to download it. And let's see. If I go over here to actions, sorry, this mouse is not my favorite thing. I go to actions. Oh, think it works. And oh yeah, all right, yeah. So over here on the create tab, if I pop down the actions, we have the option to import a workflow. And that brings us to this interface. It probably looks familiar to a lot of people. It does support this drag and drop, and it looks like it successfully created that workflow. And if I go over here, I should see the workflow in our list. But as I suspected, and despite the fact that everyone tells me I should never do live demos, yeah, we're going to try one more time. If it doesn't work, I will end my suffering by just giving up. Let's see. Sample workflows. As we all know, that cheerful message down at the bottom could be lying to us. So
Do you think you need to unzip it?
it will do that on the back end in some other universe that I'm not inhabiting right now. Oh, you know what? I think I know what it is. It's the application working is what it is. All right. What it is that these two workflows that I just imported, they're not active, right? And the facet on the side to select a active workflow was checked, and since they were not active, it was very correctly not showing me those workflows. Man, I'm just rethinking all my evil thoughts I was just thinking about our developers. I'm walking it all back. Okay. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. Yeah. So you can see it worked not only once, but it worked twice. And I'm very excited about that. We have two workflows here. I'm just going to click on one and we can see what that gives us. Okay. So this is a detailed view of the workflow. It's got some general information over here about the workflow. We are still very much in negotiation with potential users, the workflow SIG, and about what information is exactly important. I'm not totally convinced that the UUID for the workflow needs to be in here, but at this point, we're very much in early stages of what we're putting out here in the user interface. And then you can see this description of a very simple workflow. It has a start event, it has a script task, and then it ends. All right, so we can go and look at what each of these do. This start event is of type message correlation, which means that it will wait until it receives a message in order to start. This is a manually triggered event is what that means. And then if I click over here on the script task, you can see that it has some code that it will execute, and it can receive variables, both input and output variables that can be referenced within its process. And then the end event that wraps things up. I'm going to go over here. We can take a peek at this compress zip. Little bit more complicated here. Start event, also message correlation. Some of the other options here, very popular option at Texas A&M for workflows that we actually have running is a scheduled workflow. So instead of one that's triggered manually, it'll go off based on like some kind of schedule, monthly, weekly, daily, something of that nature. Other options beyond that are we can trigger workflows based on listening to interactions with Folio's API. So if something happens in the system, we can kind of watch for that. And when it occurs, we can launch a workflow. This also has a script task that executes some code, then passes the results to a file task, which writes the output from that script to a path on a mount. So it sets it aside. It then compresses that file, and at that point, we've demonstrated the compression. But oftentimes, in a lot of the workflows that we have in practice, what we will do is actually, if the file being compressed were the results of some sort of query or some sort of process, we might send them as an attachment on an email. So I don't know if we want to go through and look at all of the example workflows, but how about I just pull up the list, and let's see, we have compressed file, database connection, database query, the input task. Well, we'll do the input task. That's a good one. I guess I'm really tempting fate to try it again, but I'm feeling bold. It was a request for mics for the audience question. Let's see, I'm going to go to create actions, import, pull this input task over. And yeah. So the variables for the input task are some of the things that you get to set when you create these are basically what you would need in order to render a form. So for instance, this is of type submit. So you would imagine that would render as a button. So the idea being that, again, this is a very simple example, right? So this input task basically would just pause the workflow until you gave it instructions to continue, by clicking that button. All right, I'm going to pause. I'm happy to dive into anything else, but do we have any questions about this fraught demonstration that I just completed? Yes.
The start thingy that starts a job or a workflow, can that also listen to the Kafka messages between modules?
Yeah, that's okay. Well, actually, right now, no. And I'll get into the exciting reasons why not. At the time that we implemented the back end of this, it was before Kafka was a thing in Folio. Though this system does rely on message queuing on the back end, all the communication between Mod Workflow and Mod Camunda are implemented with a message queue. But because Kafka wasn't even on the radar back then, we just implemented ourselves, and we went with active MQ. So that's kind of embedded in the system. So we do have issues on the backlog to kind of convert our message queuing approach to Kafka, at which point the answer will be yes. But right now, no, but it's in the works. That's a great question.
And the second question, like, how complex can the script be, or like, can I do whatever I want with it in the middle? And for example, we need to regularly delete some inactive users or something like that. Could I do that?
Absolutely. And in fact, I would venture to say that if anything, once we go production with this, we're probably going to have to be really careful about how like what kind of workflows we actually empower people to build, because right now sky's the limit, and I suppose you could build a workflow that could potentially really hose your environment. So permissions and things like that are going to be really important as we move forward with development on this.
Thank you.
Thank you. How are we doing on time? Does anyone know when this session wraps up? 5:30? 5:20. All right, we're doing great. Thank you, Todd. Can this replace its workflow management? All right, the question is, we use Coral for e-resource management. Can this replace its workflow management feature with which notifies staff via email of the need to do the next step? Okay. I think that the this is a classic developer answer, I guess, but I think the answer is yes. It could, as long as the workflow that you have running has access to the data that it needs in order to make the determination that that email needs to take place. So what you will see with a lot of our workflows is something like a REST request or a database query to kind of gather some information, and then something like a script task to analyze that information and then make a decision about how to move forward with the workflow. So this question seems like something that would be handled in with that kind of rhythm of a workflow. You look like you want to add something, Owen? Yes, please.
So this is Owen. I'm the product owner for the ERM apps in Folio. We ran a session earlier today. I think it's just been mentioned in the chat. Maybe we ran a session earlier today with Jeremy, myself, and Martina, who's the convener of the ERM SIG, about exactly this question. How does this apply to ERM workflows? And we have a reporting back session. If you missed that session this morning at 10:30 tomorrow, and either if you're able to join that live or listen to the recording, well, we'll be reporting back, and it's exactly that kind of question that we're seeking to answer by discussing with Jeremy and the users of ERM exactly what's needed and how far the Workflows app can currently support it and how much it might support it in the future, and if indeed there need to be changes within the ERM apps to make that possible as well. So that is under really active discussion and at this conference, and yeah, please listen to tomorrow's session if you're interested in hearing the latest on that.
Yeah, and I am firmly of the opinion that if Workflow doesn't do it, then it probably should, because we're really trying to build something that is actually useful for people. So yeah, if the capability doesn't currently exist, but it's something that is needed, then we need to really look at what we're building and what might need to happen in order to make it support that. Okay. Any other questions before I move past the demo portion? Awesome. Okay. All right, I'm going to get a little bit into future plans, and then there will be also some opportunities for more questions at the end if there are some. Okay. So one thing I really, really want to express during this session, and really anytime I can get someone to sit still long enough to listen to me say these things. We formed the Aggies development team as an attempt to be able to focus our development efforts in areas that we felt like were strategic for Texas A&M University, but also because we had encountered many people throughout our time working on Folio who maybe were at smaller institutions or didn't have as many development resources as other people in the community. And there are just a lot of kind of smaller teams that seemed like they wanted to work on Folio, but were having a hard time engaging or finding a place to kind of dig in and get some work done. So a big part of our effort up until this point has been to create a development process and environment that, at least in theory, could onboard people from outside of Texas A&M onto the process. So we call our sprints community sprints. These have been community sprints in a lot of ways in name only, other than the fact that they are working on things that we're hoping to contribute back to the community. But as y'all saw, we have our implementation available on a publicly accessible Scratch environment. So the goal always has been that we be able to collaborate with anyone who's interested in seeing workflows kind of come to fruition. So I'm throwing these dates out here and describing some of the work that we hope to do in the future. But I would love it if we were doing this work with any of you or people from your institution as well. So that's a little plug that I'm making there. But yeah, so coming up and the remainder of this year, one of the things that we need to tackle is this idea of multi-instance workflows. So for reasons I could probably just describe as short-sightedness. Currently, our system supports one of these workflows running. For each workflow, you can have it running once, right? So you can have all of them running, but you can only have one workflow running one time. And that's really not the way they're supposed to work. Ultimately, we want them to be able to, you could fire off a workflow 10 times, 100 times. A lot of these things are processes that can and should work in parallel. And so that's not a huge amount of changes in order to support that, but that's something that we definitely need to do. And then we can get to something that I'm really excited about, and that is workflow management. So what that means is currently we're still using that command line interface to start and stop workflows and kind of to manage their running, and we're going to move that functionality into the user interface so that we can actually manage these workflows through the UI, which will enable us to move the management of workflows from a personnel standpoint out of the hands of operations or development staff, and actually we can have librarians at our institutions firing these things off. And by librarians, I mean probably me, which I use the command line interface anyway, but in theory, it's an exciting step forward, at least. We are then going to pause because our institution is upgrading to Poppy, so we're going to set aside some time at the very end of the year to make sure that all goes smoothly. But starting in January, we're going to then tackle the concept of UI, using the UI to create a workflow. So we're hoping to have a nice kind of drag and drop interface for you to start arranging these nodes and then configuring each one. After you can create a workflow, we're going to tackle editing a workflow or updating one that exists. And hopefully by that time, starting February 2025, around that time, we will have figured out a really good model for workflow permissions. It's something that has been talked about in the SIG quite a bit. We're probably going to get back to talking about that in the SIG. A lot of really good ideas surrounding workflow permissions, but we need to settle on something that is secure and safe and makes everyone feel good about using workflows, and we can start to see that implemented in the system. And then lastly, on this little preview of upcoming work is it's a big one. It's workflow interactions. So what that means is currently you can create a workflow, you can start a workflow, it can do its thing in an automated fashion. But what we really, really need is for workflows to be able to receive input, that input node. We need to build the interface for people to actually be notified that their actions are needed in order for the workflow to advance. And so surfacing that in the system is the goal for the first part for spring of next year. We have a lot of different options for how we could do that. We're looking at a couple different things. I'm excited about the idea of more collaboration with Owen on dashboards and maybe having a dashboard widget that can surface some of this stuff. Also, we could just build an interface within the workflow app that allows you to have some of these interactions. There's a couple of different things that we're looking at, but hopefully that, and I'm sure it will become more clear which direction we're going to go in as that time approaches. The people who made the slide deck included this really cool quotation slide. So I decided to put in this quote: "If there are any development resources at your institution that you would like to invest in folio development, the Aggies development team would love to bring your devs on board." Jeremy Huff, the guy speaking to you right now. I am so fast. We have 15 minutes for questions. I would love to answer some questions. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
The workflows looked rather linear right now. Is there any branching support, error catching support, or even parallelization support planned?
That is such a good question. Okay, so the workflows are very much not linear. It's a limitation of our visualization. Okay, so right now we have only visualized the top portion of a workflow, and the examples that I loaded today were in fact very linear workflows. But the workflows that we have in production support all sorts of nifty things like conditionals and sub-processes, parallel processes, and we have mock-ups in place for how we want those to be visualized, but just have not gotten to those visualizations yet.
Did you think about using one of those already existing visualization frameworks like, or rather visual programming frameworks like Scratch?
Yeah, we did. These are great questions. We did look into that, and another thing that has come up a lot with this is, like our workflow engine is Camunda, which does a really great job of visualizing the workflows that we're executing. So why not just use that visualization technique? One of the things that we ran into with that was we really, really would like to see this implemented against other workflow engines other than Camunda. So we didn't want to lean too heavily into Camunda's representation. In truth, the workflow that's being represented is only incidentally being executed by Camunda. It's a Folio workflow, so we wanted something that was dedicated to rendering a Folio workflow. Now, that said, there are, as you mentioned, lots of really good libraries for doing visualizations of things of that nature. And that is actually still on the table for us. We opted for a shorter path to get something on the screen, basically. But we do have some spikes where we are exploring other libraries for that.
Just as a side note, I know OpenHub has a rather nice UI for doing this automation stuff. It's more visual programming there, but in the end, it's just a YAML file that's describing the workflow, and maybe that could be a solution for you.
Are you on the Folio Slack? Would you mind slacking me a link? That's awesome. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Hey, Owen, thank you so much for running around with the microphones.
You mentioned production workflows. Can you give some examples? Like what exactly are you doing?
Sure. Yeah, I'm just gonna riff off the top of my head. So I probably should have pulled some up, but we have a really massive purchase order workflow that brings in, creates new instances from Edifact, and it's it's just a really massive workflow. We have a workflow that runs that manages our patrons. It connects to our central campus enrollment and faculty information in order to ensure that the patrons that exist in our system are accurate to the who's enrolled at our school. We have a lot of workflows surrounding reporting. I would say maybe almost half of them are produce reports that we then visualize using other applications. So that is roughly about half of our workflows are implicated in reporting processes also. Those are some examples.
And do you want to share them, or because
Sure.
I think many workflows are basically the same, maybe some little differences between libraries. So will there be like a sharing workflow hub or?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, every workflow that we have is renderable in our system and will be exportable as these FWZs. Even now, like all the workflows that we're running in production can be packaged up in this way. So, at least in theory, right now, if two institutions were running our current version of the workflow app, I could package up all my workflows and send them on over there, and they could load them up into their system, and they would do. Now the workflows are configured, to work for our system, and I imagine in reality sharing these workflows is going to be more like kind of sharing a starting place Like you pass it off to somebody else, they load it up in their system and like, this is 90% of the way there, but I need to tweak these things in order to, to make it work for us. That's probably the reality of sharing these things. Also, currently, packaging these things up and sending them to someone else is going to be like, just transferring a file in a very manual way. So there has been talk about trying to allow the system to allow for the sharing of workflows like within the system itself, which would be really interesting. But that would definitely be late stage development for this. Any other questions?
There's one in the chat.
Thank you.
I can say it out loud actually.
Okay.
Which is, would we be able to take a patron applications for library cards, which is currently a web form, and import those to create new patron accounts?
If without seeing your web form, I hesitate to to overpromise, but the intent behind the input task that I demoed today is specifically to be able to expose something like a web form and allow for the input to that form to inform the remainder of a workflow process. So it sounds like that task node would be a good fit for that. Whatever is present in your current form, you would represent in your input task. Maybe on a dashboard widget, you would be able to go to that and see that input task rendered, provide the information, click continue, and the rest of the workflow would kick off. It certainly has the capability to manage patron accounts. So as I mentioned, we have a workflow right now that is creating patrons. So it sounds highly likely, I guess, is what I will say. Any other questions? Well, being the last session of the day, I know nobody will mind if we wrap up a little bit early. So, all right. My email's up on the screen.
There's another question in
that
chat.
Is fine too. That is fine too.
Could a workflow be, tell me all of user accounts that were inactivated today that have outstanding bills or checkouts?
All right. So here's a way to answer that question. We have a query node. So anything that you can figure out with a database query to either like the LDP or the MetaDB, or even if you have the guts, trolling through the JSON and production databases, anything that you can find out with a query can be extracted using a workflow, and then decisions can be made based on that information. So when I say that these things have a lot of power and potential, it really is the sky's the limit. The UI for Folio is nothing but a client interfacing with the API. In a sense, each one of these workflows is in itself a client interacting, at least potentially, with Folio's API, but then even beyond Folio's API, it can interact with databases, both databases for Folio or external databases that you might have access to that might be implicated in your business processes. So these workflows can really bring together information from a lot of disparate sources in order to make decisions and inform the workflow process.
May I add something?
Please.
So just earlier, I mentioned, it's Owen again here, the work that we'd done this morning and we'll be reporting back on yesterday for ERM. And this kind of question, like, what would a workflow look like that achieved this outcome, is exactly the kind of thing that we're doing in those exercises. So we're taking a workflow that people have in ERM and saying, in this case, it's a user workflow, and saying, okay, what kind of activity would be needed? And so I think Jeremy's answer here points to like questions like, okay, so first of all, how do you find out all the user accounts that have become inactivated today? Like, is that a query that you can do, say, through the UI, or is there a list somewhere that you're already like managing in a file, or is it part of a reporting solution you have implemented with Folio already, or none of those? And like the answer to that first question might then depend on what the workflow looks like, or indeed whether it's even possible. And working through those questions as we're at these kind of stages of doing the workflow implementation in Folio is, I think, exactly the right process. So I think these are the right questions to ask. And obviously we've done that for ERM. I guess we'll see how successful that is. And maybe if it turns out to be successful, then we could look at, well, I say we, Jeremy could maybe work with some other product owners to carry out some similar exercises in other areas of Folio.
I think that's a great idea, and I really appreciate the interaction of the ERM folks with this and like engaging in this process, because it's bringing forward a lot of great requirements for the future development in workflows. But yeah, if I had to implement that workflow today, I would start with a database query that would gather the information that was necessary, and then make some request node requests to a copy in order to accomplish the actions and the changes that need to take place.
There is another example workflow in the chat.
Sure.
If you've got time.
Yeah, I got 3 minutes.
I have a list of graduating students that are not designated in Folio, but I'd like to send them a special notice. Could the workflow app support that?
Yeah. So again, without knowing the specifics of your situation, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that these students, this list of students that you have, is either in like maybe a CSV that you have access to, or present on some database or system at your institution. So depending on the answer to that question would depend on what the workflow would look like. Let's say it's a CSV, then you would probably start the workflow with one of these input nodes that would have a file dropdown that allowed you to attach a file onto the process, right? And then you could load that CSV up, and that CSV could then be parsed by the workflow and then acted on. If the CSV contained email addresses or things of that nature, then that, that's fine. That would be easy enough to do. If in fact these students are listed out in a system that's accessible either through an HTTP call or a database query, then you would use either the request task to make the HTTP call to get the information, or the database query task in order to query the database to get that information. And once you obtain the information, you could then the rest of the workflow would look exactly the same for the most part as it would if you had started off with a file. So I think that answers the question. All right. Thank you, folks. I really appreciate getting to show this stuff to you. Thank you very much.